Hello and welcome to the Political Orphanage, a home for plucky contortionists and friendly lion tamers. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton. And last month, I flew down to McAllen, Texas to visit the border and put together a pretty good 2-hour special on the topic. And you're about to hear from one of the people that I interviewed who I so enjoyed talking to, I decided to make the discussion into an episode in its own right. So at one point at that press junket, we were getting ready to hear from a peach farmer about temporary agricultural visas. And as a joke, I said to my table, which visa do we want to cheer for and which one do we want to boo? Because the concept of cheering or booing for specific visa paperwork struck me as a funny thing to do. But a guy at the end of the table, who had a mustache and bears a striking resemblance to Wilford Brimley, leaned forward to very earnestly tell me, actually, both visas are mutually beneficial to the applicants and to their host countries. No guile, just straight up pro-temporary immigration visas perspective. Now, originally I was going to get a quick soundbite from this fellow to incorporate into last month's special, maybe 2 or 3 minutes just to discuss visas. But I quickly discovered that the reason he was interested in visas is that he is a retired circus ringmaster who spent decades working in the circus. And so we don't even get into immigration for about half an hour because I had a lot of circus questions for him. But then when we do get into immigration visas, he's extremely knowledgeable. So I decided to make this discussion an episode in and of itself, and I think you'll get as much of a kick out of it as I did. Enjoy! James Judkins, how are you involved in immigration?
Well, I'm involved in non-immigration.
You're involved in non-immigration.
Bringing workers who would like to come in the country as non-immigrants.
Okay.
To spend a period of time working legally and then go home to their home countries and leaving their families at home. So it's part of the immigration program, but it's mislabeled. It should be an employment program or a employer job seeker program, but not immigration, because these people that come in do not immigrate.
Okay, I mean, I did right when I graduated college. I worked in another country, but I didn't get citizenship or move there or anything. I was authorized to work there for 6 months, and then I came back to America. So same kind of thing, where somebody's coming over. Presumably, they're doing it less as a top up to their college experience, getting novelty stories in their bag, but to get money and opportunity. But plans come to America, work for some period of time, send the money back home, leave, go back. They don't want to live in America, or at least not yet. They want to continue their life where they are, but they'd like to work and have the economic opportunity.
Correct. The difference is some countries, the people that come and work are like teenagers, not teenagers, but young college students like you were.
Uh-huh.
And they come just for like a 1 year or 2 year stint to experience America. And other countries, it's people that come and it becomes like a career for them. They can come, work 9 months out of the year, go back home, spend 3 months with their family, earn way much more money than they'd ever earn in a year at home, be able to build a house, build a business at home, work 5, 6, 7 years, and then stop coming to the country after they've established themselves in their home country.
I was in New York a year ago, and I had a taxi conversation with a guy that couldn't have been older than 26, and he was from, I think, Pakistan, and he was talking to me about he was already married, and he was working like 80 hours a week, driving taxis, and he was like, I'm going to be able to retire by 35. He was like, I'm packing the money away. I live in bunk beds with some buddies. I assume he was legal to work here. I don't know what the situation was, but he figured it out. He was like, I'm gonna be back. Like I'm gonna go back twice a year, see my wife. We Zoom every day. I'm packing the money away. I will be able to retire at 35, raise kids, get to know my grandkids. And I was like, oh, I feel like kind of a loser now.
Yeah, he had a plan. He had a plan. Yeah. And when we were his age, we may have just been penniless as well, but he had a plan at least.
So you are now on the agency side of this. So you're not an immigration attorney, but you're running.
No, well, what happened is when I was in college, I had a friend who wanted to join a circus as a juggler.
Okay.
And when he applied, they said, we don't need any jugglers, but we could use some cooks. And because my student job was working at the dining center, he asked me if I wanted to join the circus. So I joined the circus as a cook. He quit a couple of days later, but I stayed. And then as different jobs opened up, because people left or things changed, I eventually became a fire eater and a sword swallower and did Bed of Nails and Punch and Judy show and became an inside talker, the sideshow, and an outside talker.
Inside talker, outside, is that like a barker? Like my background's comedy, and you stand outside the club and go, hey, we're doing a show. Richard Pryor's not dead. He's performing tonight. So like that kind of thing?
Yeah, but he is dead.
Yeah, he is dead. They were lying. But yeah.
No, I was the inside talker, and that's where you're basically going around and saying we're taking 17 steel blades and putting them through the blade box, and Miss Amy is inside, and she's twisting and turning and convoluting her body so that that type of thing.
Yeah.
And the outside talker is what you're talking about is, come on over, and then you do the pitch about what they're going to see inside, and it's only $1, and you get the money and they get inside.
Sweet. So you got into immigration through the circus, and you became one of the acts. You became like these various roles of the circus.
Well, what happened was there was a student circus, an all-student circus, and the owner of the show left, and it was just the inmates running the asylum. So we just kept going and going and going, and finally we ran out of money, and we had a baby elephant rented from a big circus in Oklahoma. So we packed the elephant. I packed the elephant up in a U-Haul truck with my last $600 and drove from Ocala, Florida, back to Hugo, Oklahoma.
Yep, that's where the Hugo, Oklahoma, from Oklahoma. Hugo's where they winter the animals. That's
where the circus is.
Yeah.
Circus City, USA. And I was there for 20 years working as a general manager for Carson and Barnes Circus. And while I was there, we had to bring in circus acts from around the world and support people. So that's what I did with immigration. It was back before there was the H-2B visa. And then as I traveled, I became friends with some carnival owners who also needed help. And so I started getting workers for them. And then I saw my own circus, and then it became much easier to do immigration work or non-immigration work than to run a circus with 100 employees going around the country. So I closed the circus down and have just been working on bringing in H-2B workers and P-1 workers and O-1 performers and all of that for the last 100 years.
So when you're hip deep in the circus, you're driving around there with the baby elephant in the back of the pickup truck and the other recent students that are part of the circus. Why do foreigners need to enter the equation? Is it that like other countries have superior juggling skills, or there's just like we can pay Americans as much as you want, they don't want to be contortionists? What was the issue?
Well, if you go back through all the old circus posters way back in the 1700s, the first time somebody ever saw an elephant was they went to a circus. The first time people saw a Mongolian contortionist, they went to a circus. High wire acts came from Colombia. They went to a circus. Different artists with different skills are trained by their families in their home countries. And usually a farm boy in Iowa isn't going to learn how to be a flying trapeze artist. But somebody who was born on a circus in Mexico might become the first person to a quadruple somersault. And you go out and find these people that have never been to the United States, first time in America. And that's why at one point in time, Ringling Brothers were the richest men in the world. They were the Elon Musks of their generation, because the first time people saw electric light bulbs, they saw movie theaters, they saw elephants, giraffes, these types of artists was at the circus. So the circus has a long tradition.
That honestly, that makes sense to me, because like I grew up, Dad was an attorney when I was a kid. I could have picked various white-collar professions, but if there'd been something very, very, very specific like that, of like, I'm a professional yodeler or something, that you kind of need to get that from the family way, or have some kind of connection to it. And those are based in various places, so you got to go hunt for them. If you're going to go find the Mongolian contortionist, you probably got to go to Mongolia, where, like you said, the trapeze people were more concentrated in Colombia. So would you go scouting? How would you find the people?
Well, I'd go scouting. I traveled all over the place. I could stories about driving through little villages and towns and going down to Brazil and to Peru and to I was down there when Pinochet was in charge of Chile.
Yeah.
That was quite a trip.
Wait, so you're the guy like in the movie where, some kid has a dream and he can fit his whole body in a bottle and they're like, it'll never work. You're the guy that shows up like with a top hat and a cape that goes, son, I like the cut of your jib. How would you like to come join the circus? You're that guy.
Yeah, I'm that guy.
Okay, cool.
And it was basically a fish tank that we found him. And he was in Merida, Yucatan. Alejandro Rodahel found him. He was a contortionist that he started his act off in a fish tank. And then all of a sudden the leg popped out of his fish tank and then he went from there. Wow.
Okay. So we'll get back to the immigration in a minute, but I have so many questions about the circus that I got to get out of my system first. When you're in the circus, is that your social life? Like, does the act concludes and y'all go to a bar? Like, is it like a big family?
There is no social life. The circus becomes your life.
Okay.
I was with Carson and Barnes was big 5-ring wild animal circus with 27 elephants. We played 7 different towns a week. Different town every single day. So you get up in the morning, you'd go to the next town, set up, put on 2 shows, tear down, go to sleep. Now there's a documentary about it out called Elephants and Cherry Pie. Elephants and Cherry Pie.
That's about your circus specifically?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to check that out. Elephants and Cherry Pie.
Elephants and Cherry Pie. That was a circus that was Carson and Barnes.
And so you're working like 70 hours a week or something.
Right.
When you're circus. It's not like you knock off at. This makes total sense. Now that I think about it, circuses don't close at 5 p.m. and everybody goes home, plays pickleball. Like they're active in the evening.
Your idea of time off was Sunday shows. We'd have a show at 2:00 and 4:30, so we'd be done by 7, and then we could sit around and bullshit.
Okay. So when you've got people that have never been to the States before, that are from Colombia, from Mongolia, or whatever. Did they get a warped view of America through the circus, or do you do like a Rumspringa thing where you drive them into town and show them a grocery store? Like, how did that work?
I don't know. They just sort of have to pick it up on their own.
Okay.
We've had Chinese people come. We've had, it's just them. Circus people are circus people. And they're used to being in the circus. So, if they came from a circus in Mongolia or a circus in China or a circus in Mexico or Brazil, they're circus people.
Got it. Okay.
And the same thing when I go traveling and I go to a circus, I'm a circus person.
Can you do that? Because now your Act 2 is running this agency for people that are doing temporary work visas in the United States. But can you like go to Cirque du Soleil and like knock on the door and give them the password and they're like, "Come on in, fellow carny"?
Well, carny refers to carnival.
Okay, sorry.
So it's different, but that's all right. I'm not offended by either one of them.
Thanks.
Well, Cirque du Soleil is more of a big corporation owned by a Chinese conglomerate now.
Really? I always figured it was Quebecois, but it's owned by some corporation in China?
But it was bought out by some big Chinese conglomerate. So it really is not. I couldn't go knock on the door, but I've got a lot of circus friends that work at different Cirque shows, and if I talk to them, I can get in. But I have to go that way,
But like let's say like Ringling Brothers come to town, or Barnum and Bailey come to town.
Yeah, they're closed. They're out of business.
Are they? Okay. I clearly
I know. I can. I can pretty much go to any show I want to.
And is that like? Is it a thing where you walk up and like my background's comedy, so like I can generally go up to comedians, just talk to them for a minute, and be like, do you know Noam Dwarman? Yeah, and then like I kind of get invited into the green room. Is it like that for you?
Well, I'm pretty well known, so if I show up, they know I'm there. And most of the circuses, when I was looking for acts, they would want to come out and talk to me so they could keep me occupied, so it would be harder for me to go talk to their performers and hire them away.
Okay, what was the hardest job? Because you said you started as a cook, you became a fire eater, and then a sword eater, and then a inside talker, outside talker. Did you get to ringmaster? What was the?
I was ringmaster. I was manager. I've done just about everything.
Okay, yeah.
Well, probably the most difficult thing was when I moved over to Carson and Barnes. It's a big 5-ring show, and a lot of people had been there for ages and ages. It was the old time circus, and the owner of the show, D.R. Miller, he was sick and he couldn't go on the road that year. So he basically said, I was like 21 years old, just out of college. He said, "You're going to be the manager this year." And I says, "Well, I don't know anything." And he said, "Well, just tell them DR wants it done that way." So I was there, and it worked for 20 years. So I guess it was good advice. So,
Okay.
and then we went, we were featured in Time magazine, and we traveled all over the country, and it was a great run.
Is fire eating and sword eating like riding a bicycle? Like, can you go to the circus now and someone hands you a sword and you're like, I got this?
And swords, no.
Okay.
Fire eating is pretty simple.
Okay.
But sword swallowing is more like something you acclimate your throat and your gag reflex and all that to, if you're doing it right.
Okay.
I started off.
So that's real. They really do swallow it.
I was taught by Sammy the sword swallower.
Uh-huh.
And he started off with, it was metal coat hangers and disinfecting them and then getting over the gag reflex and then moving on to other things that were swords.
I always just assumed it was a magic trick where it retracted into the hilt. Like they're actually putting that on their body?
Yes.
Wow, okay. I've gained some more respect for the profession.
Yeah, it's basically, and the ones that do it well, I mean, I've seen acts on America's Got Talent that are amazing. It's like I did magic with the circus, and 50 years ago, I could look at a magic act, and say, I know how that's done. I look at the stuff they're doing now, and I've got no idea how they can accomplish that stuff they're doing now. It's just amazing stuff.
I see that you've got a wedding ring. Did you marry within Circus?
No, I didn't.
Okay, all right. Did you date within Circus when you were 21?
I fooled around a lot.
Okay, yeah. I was going to say, because I bet that's a hell of a lot of fun.
It's one of those things at the end of the season, it's, I love you, honey, but the season's over.
This sounds great. Having just like a transitionary circus relationship? Man, I should have done that instead of becoming a tour guide. That sounds fantastic. Okay, well, you mentioned that Ringling Brothers went under and Barnum and Bailey went under, but there still are circuses. It's just those particular circus corporations that went under?
Yeah, they went under. The circus industry's changed quite a bit. I mean, they've become more ethnically, like Circus Vasquez is an all-Mexican circus.
Oh, okay.
And they play to Mexican communities. And like if you just drive down from here, less than 20 miles away, they got a huge, beautiful tent, and they got a beautiful show. And there's other shows around the country that are geared towards, a Peruvian circus or an ice circus or a water circus or a paranormal circus.
Okay.
They've gone niche to different, and they know where to go, and they have their audiences. So, but the big old time circus is just.
Well, plus, like I recall, I think it was either Barnum and Bailey or Ringling Brothers. I don't remember which. They had decided that they were going to retire and not replace their elephants. They were concerned about the treatment of the elephants, and that was part of their. And I don't know whether that precipitated the demise of the corporation, but I do not know how your elephants were treated, or particularly the baby elephant that you alluded to earlier. But I could see how if you were concerned about animal welfare and it was juxtaposed with a circus life, that would become a thing going forward.
Well, actually, the whole animals are treated badly at circuses was a fraud and a myth. We brought in animal psychologists. We brought in from the A&M University in Texas to test the elephants and see, and they were basically more happier performing and with their group than they were not performing.
Okay.
And most of the circuses with animals were put out of business mainly because of regulatory framework.
Really?
Where the USDA decided that most elephants have inactive tuberculosis.
Okay.
And that's, people can have inactive tuberculosis. It's basically your system has fought it off.
Okay.
And elephant babies, most of them came from Asia, and the people that handle them chew this weed, they spit it out, and the elephants would eat it, and they'd get it into their system. But the USDA mandated these draconian rules where, like, every elephant that came within a certain number of feet of the public had to have a tuberculosis test that was, washing out the elephant's trunk, doing a trunk wash and all that. That was very painful for the elephants. And so most people that had elephants cared enough about the elephants to donate them to, even though each elephant was worth $200,000, $300,000, they donated them to animal preserves and not put those elephants through that treatment every 2 months.
Okay.
And it was basically the owners of the animals cared more about the animals than the supposed animal experts that were that were mandating stuff that was really unnatural and unnecessary, because no elephant in history has ever given tuberculosis to a human.
That's good to know. So the concern wasn't even that the elephants would pass it to other elephants, because we don't have that many indigenous elephants in the United States, and the elephants that we do have are already kind of passive carriers anyway.
Right.
So it was a nonsensical...
It was basically a regulation that was come up to get circus elephants off the road.
And presumably from some well-meaning animal rights group that did not actually interact with the circus itself.
No, but they interacted with the USDA and convinced the USDA to follow that path.
I volunteered at 2 different elephant preserves. One was, both of them were in Thailand. The first one was a very, very hands-off preserve. And I mean, I think I met one elephant, but mostly I shoveled elephant shit. That was mostly my job. And then the next one I went to...
I did that for quite a while, too.
Yeah, have you done? Yeah, you shoveled a fair amount of elephant shit?
Yeah.
The next one I went to, it was much more hands-on, and I still don't know which one had the better attitude. The first one was like, look, these are wild animals. We're going to treat them as such. We're going to respect them, give them their space. The other elephant preserve was like, these were all like fairly brutalized animals that were like being forced to do tricks in a city, and they don't know how to be wild animals. They know how to interact with people, and so we give them a very good life here, but we're interacting with them, and I don't know, they seem pretty happy to me.
Well, in Oklahoma, where you're from, down in Hugo, there's an Endangered Ark Foundation where they've got quite a few elephants there still, and they bring school kids in and they interact with the kids and they show them about how the elephant maintenance is and all that. And that's a good place to go to. They have quite a few tours.
Okay.
They're very low key, but they have a very nice, it's called Endangered Ark Foundation.
Is it like a retirement home for circus elephants?
Basically, yes.
Okay. I would love to check that out. That sounds great. Out of curiosity, why? Okay, I've been to Hugo, but Hugo's like in the southeast part of Oklahoma. Like it still gets kind of cold in the winter. You have any idea why they picked that to winter elephants at? It doesn't make... I would have gone to like Florida or something if I were worried about heat.
Well, there's a long story, but it started with the circus first starting in up in Kansas, and they moved south to Arkansas, and then they moved south to Oklahoma, and then they stopped.
Okay.
Because they found a place where the community was very friendly to the circus.
All right.
And it's hard to find that. So they had a community that was circus friendly, and at one point in time, I think there were 5 different circuses based there in Hugo.
I love the story. So this is because Hugo was open and pluralistic and tolerant to circus folk.
Right.
That they decided it was just receptiveness of the locals. I like that. But by the time you were working in the circus, did they still have like sideshows or freak shows, or had that gone out the way?
Well, the sideshows were more like exhibits, like the world's smallest horse, or reptiles. But as far as human oddities, that or people that had gone by the wayside at that point in time.
Yeah.
They were early 20s, 30s, 40s, and then they mainly retired to Sarasota, Florida. And most of them, you know, the people that were in those professions, if you talk to them, they felt that they had a wonderful life, and they made a lot more money, and they were much more productive and had families and put kids and grandkids through school. And then if they had, just tried to panhandle or something.
I had watched a documentary years ago about sideshows, and kind of similar to what you're describing with the elephants, there were well-meaning pearl clutchers that went, it's horrible that anybody would have a freak show. How dare you treat these people as oddities? And so they banned them in all these states. And the people that were participating went, well, I'm hanging out with all these people that look at me like a normal person. We're all a bit unique, but we're not bothered by it, and we're able to make income from it. And some of us are disfigured enough that it would be difficult for us to sustain normal jobs outside of this. So they were all there voluntarily. It's not like they got captured and forced to join the circus or something. They were there because it was a good opportunity for them.
And when I first joined the circus, I remember there were people there that had been there a long time, and we had like a guy that was one. They had the experiments with black men in Alabama, Tuskegee or
the Tuskegee experiments,
yeah, something like that. And there was one guy that the syphilis had affected him mentally, and so he traveled with the circus and helped set up and tear down the tent. And his family came out to the show every year and thanked the circus owners for having him stay there. And they made sure he had his medication every day. He had a job. He had an income. He had respect. He had friends. He had dignity. And there were 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people that were, they wouldn't make it in normal society.
Right. They were kind of low functioning.
They're low functioning in different ways. But they made it at the circus, and the circus took care of them.
Mm.
And while I was there, I was there 20 years, and they were at the ends of their lives. They had been there a while, and some of them passed away, and they got, they were given grand funerals in Hugo and buried at the circus cemetery.
There's a circus cemetery in
Hugo?
Hugo?
There's a circus cemetery in Hugo with tombstones shaped like elephants and tents and all that. You need to get down to Hugo.
I need to go back to Hugo.
Take a look.
Also, not that I would crash a funeral, but I'm thinking a circus funeral would be amazing. There's this film, Big Fish, that made a big impact on me as a kid. And I think he was in the circus at one point. You see everybody that shows up to the funeral, and there's top hats and Siamese twins and dance, just everything. There's this huge cavalcade of interesting people.
Yeah, when Mr. Miller, the owner of Carson and Barnes, passed away, they had him, an elephant pulled his casket through downtown.
Wow.
And all of that. That was quite a thing.
90% of what I know from circuses, or know of circuses, is from the film The Greatest Entertainer with Hugh Jackman. The Greatest Showman, right, with Hugh Jackman, which is wonderful music, by the way. But I'm guessing it's not fully accurate. In that film, they portray circus folk as one big family. Does it feel like a big family, or is it just a interesting company you're working for where people have weird skills?
When I was on the road, it was like family.
Yeah.
And I don't know how things are now, and I don't know how it was then, but it was like a family. And it's like when I go see another circus, you're part of a worldwide circus family. Now, that was I think it was about P.T. Barnum, basically. It was based on his life. Yeah. And he was sort of an oddity by, in his own respect. But circus life is a good life, or was a good life. And also, like the circus kids, they studied and they learned hard work, and a lot of them went on to become valedictorians. And are they
mostly homeschooled?
They're mainly homeschooled, yeah, but they've got more work ethic, and they know the world a little bit more, because a lot of kids nowadays, they don't know where the difference between California and New York State and Florida are.
I would think that anybody that's raised in the circus is going to be a great deal more worldly than growing up in the suburbs of Dipstick, Nebraska, or Leaky Elbow, Oklahoma, or wherever. I would think that would impart to you a certain awareness of how the world operates. Were there a lot of kids in the circus that you were at that were, kids of the performers?
Right, and a lot of the kids were performers, but a lot of families had their kids there, and a lot of times the mom would stay home. They start the school year in September, and then when the circus went on the road, the teachers would pack up all their lessons for them, and then they'd go out in the spring, and they could go out in the spring and finish up the school year on the road.
This sounds like a great life. I'm 40, and I'm like, I should run away and enjoy the circus. This sounds terrific. Okay, so when you transitioned from the circus to your current job, is that we'll talk about immigration in a minute, which was actually the reason I wanted to talk to you before I got sidetracked on the circus for 25 minutes. When you transitioned from working at the circus to doing a visa agency, is that a difficult come down? Is it socially isolating, or?
No, what happened was I was doing them both at the same time.
Okay.
I was running my circus, and it started off small with the visas. I had a couple of carnival owners came and wanted workers, so I'd contact people in Veracruz, Mexico, and get them ready. I'd do the paperwork. I'd fly to Monterrey, Mexico, and process the workers, and then I get on the bus, and a lot of times I ride the bus all the way with them to the carnival, and then I'd get off the bus and I'd go back to the circus, and I did that for years, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger business, and I couldn't do it all. And then with the circus, there was like an accident with a vehicle that wasn't even my vehicle, and I got sued, and then it just dawned on me that here I am, all this liability. I've got all these 100 people out there working, and if some morning one of the trucks hits a school bus, that's my liability. And with my immigration stuff, it was like just myself working, or two or three, and so it just made sense to close the circus down, which I wish I had just given it to some of the circus performers now, but hindsight is always, how it is. And then I just continued with this agency, and this agency has grown like 3 times bigger than what the circus ever was.
Really?
Yeah. And I bring in about 10,000 people a year, and they just about every state fair in the country, if you go to it, from the California State Fair up to the Maine State Fair, and all of them in between have got, H-2B workers there working. The Oklahoma State Fair.
Yeah. So like when I think of like seasonal workers or migratory workers, I don't know what the proper term is, like temporary workers. When I think of temporary international workers, I think of fruit pickers that are coming up seasonally. But it doesn't sound like you're so much involved in agriculture. You're handling like fairs, carnivals, circuses, things like that.
Right. There's different types of visas. The H-2A is reserved for temporary seasonal agricultural workers. H-2B is reserved for non-agricultural workers.
Okay.
And they have different rules, but basically an employer has to prove that they're a seasonal business. They have to prove that they can't get U.S. workers to fill those jobs. And then the Department of Labor has to certify that the hiring of foreign workers would not adversely affect the wages or working conditions of any U.S. workers.
Okay.
And once they're certified to that respect, then they're allowed to hire foreign workers. And it's quite a rigorous program.
Yeah.
And once the workers come in, there's audits and there's checks. But I mean, the workers want to come back year after year after year, because like I have some carnivals or food concessions operators, for example, they only work 3 months out of the year. So if I've got single mothers trying to raise their children down in Mexico, I can give them a job that in 3 months, they can earn way more than they can earn a whole year at home.
Right.
They can leave their kids with their mother for 3 months, go to work, come home, have enough money that they can advance themselves, and then they spend 9 months with their families, with their children. It's not like they're abandoning their families.
Mm-hmm.
And the good thing about this program is, for instance, a man comes, works 9 months, sends the money home. While he's here, he's paying taxes. So the taxes are going into the government. He doesn't have children here going to school, so they're not eating up resources. He doesn't have a wife and kids here going to the hospital, using up hospital resources. Then he goes home for 3 months, and he can show other people there that by doing it legally, correctly, and following the rules, he can get ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of having to pay some cartel, or somebody else. And if somebody comes in illegally and they're working under the table, they're not covered by workers' comp insurance, they chop off their hand, what's going to happen?
Nothing. You're fired, I guess.
Right, you're fired, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. I never saw that guy. He's never been here.
Yeah.
But if they're with an employer that's an H-2B employer, they're covered. They have to be covered by workers' comp insurance. They have to, they get treated with respect, like a human being, not like a tool that somebody, that's why I get so upset with all the talking heads on television stuff talking about the foreign labor programs like they're just for the benefit of the employer. Well, they do benefit the employer. They benefit the employer's customers. They benefit the employer's U.S. workers that depend upon the assistance from the foreign workers. They also benefit the country, and they benefit the workers in their home country, and even people that aren't even involved in the program. They send that money home, and if they buy groceries at the grocery store, the market that sold it, that money circulates in their home community and raises the economy. And it's so much better than the U.S. government sending $10 billion to a president of some country where it's just going to end up in a Swiss bank account. And then when they depose the president 5 years later, They say, oh, he's the second richest person in the world. Well, that money didn't come from him running a video store on the corner.
Right.
It was all the money he stole from the U.S. government. Yeah. And it never went to his people.
I'm very much in agreement with you. And I'll add, I agree with everything you just said, but I'll add to that like just from a philosophical perspective, I feel fairly strongly that if you own a business, you can hire who you want for the business. I don't really think it should be contingent upon you to explain how you hiring somebody in no way could ever theoretically impact the employment options of someone else that lives in your county. Like right now I can if I want to, running a podcast, theoretically I could outsource the podcast to somebody in another country, but why is it I can't hire somebody to come work here? On that note, while I'm very much simpatico with you, the talking heads would say, this is undercutting U.S. labor, that by bringing in people from Mexico that are working for lower wages, you're adding labor to the labor supply, which is going to lower demand, which is going to suppress wages for everybody. Therefore, we should stop it, and that would increase wages.
Well, that's totally false, because the H-2B workers, they have to be paid what's called the prevailing wage, which is the average wage that the Department of Labor says that U.S. workers in that profession, in that area of the country would earn. So if you're bringing in a group of workers that are being paid the average wage, not the lowest wage, but the average wage.
This does not bypass minimum wage.
No.
It's not that normally I'd have to pay, as we all know, a contortionist $22 an hour. That's a going rate for contortionists. But if I hire one from Honduras, I can give them $8 an hour. That's not the case.
No.
Okay.
You have to pay the prevailing wage. And if the state or local government has some sort of a regulation that their wage is higher, you have to pay the highest wage.
Okay.
So over time, the H-2B job program actually increases the wages, because if you just statistically sit there and say you bring in, there's 100 people that do that job in that area. You bring in 100 more that are paid the average wage. That statistically raises the average wage for the next year, because there's only 50 people that are at average or below, and there's 150 at average or above. So every year the wages go up.
I think I follow you. So if let's say that there's scattershot wages, some people are making $8 an hour, some people are making $12 an hour, but it averages $10 an hour. With these visas for people coming into the country, the minimum is $10 an hour. So we're saying, rather than saying they're working for an average, we are going to legally mandate they work the minimum of the average, and that's going to push the average up for everybody.
Right. They have to get paid. The minimum they can be paid is the average. They can be paid more, but no less. So every year, the average wage in that community for that job classification increases. So the idea that they are undercutting U.S. workers is totally false.
Well, and you said also that you have to prove to the Department of Labor that you were unable to fill it with an American worker?
Right. You have to, that job goes to the state unemployment office.
Oh, really? Okay.
Right. And it runs for a period of time, and you by law have to interview and hire any U.S. worker that's recommended to you by the state. So if I say I need 10 people to work on iBigTop, and I have 5 people apply, I have to give a lawful reason why I didn't hire those 5 U.S. workers. And if I do hire them, I have to pay them the exact same wages and working conditions that were being offered to the foreign workers. I can't tell say a foreign worker, well, we're going to provide you housing, but a U.S. worker not. We have to, the conditions have to be exactly the same.
And you have to provide housing?
Well, if you're in the mobile entertainment industry, you do.
Okay.
And in several other industries, like landscapers, a lot of times they don't have to, but they do.
Okay.
So if they do, and they say, we're going to provide housing for the workers coming from Honduras, they also have to pay housing for the workers coming from Choctaw County, Oklahoma.
Right. Gotcha. Okay.
It's got to be the same. You can't discriminate in any way.
That's a legal bit. So it might be that I'm not For mobile entertainment, you have to provide housing. While it's not your field with agricultural visas, people that are migrant fruit pickers, they have to provide housing if they're doing it legally.
But like we heard earlier today, only about 25% of the migrant workers are under a visa program. So basically 75%, you go to those fields, there's families living in the back of an Impala that have no bathroom facilities. They don't have refrigerators. They don't have schooling. They don't have any of that because they're not here part of a legal program. They're here undocumented. So that's why I get so upset with the government coming down hard. They make it so difficult for these farmers and for the employers that are trying to do right to follow the rules. And the groups of workers that are coming in and working under the table with no workers' comp, no insurance, no paying taxes, they're the ones that are suffering, and they're the ones the government needs to go after, not the ones that are, I'm going to fine you $10,000 because you didn't turn in this piece of paper, and that's what most of the violations that they find in the H-2A or H-2B program are like paper issues, or like housing. If you have to provide housing in H-2A and you put screens on all the windows, and one of the workers decides they want to run an electric cable out a window, and they poke a hole in the screen and run the electric cable outside so they can play a boombox outside on a Saturday night, which, is fair enough.
That's a dorm might do that.
But if the inspector comes by and sees a hole in the screen, the employer is going to get fined $5,000.
Yeah.
But the employer the next farm down the block where they don't have H-2B workers, they could have a whole family living in a pickup truck. Where's the logic with that?
We heard from a peach growing farmer earlier today that talked about the agricultural side of it. And the two things that really struck me, he did not say this, but my takeaway from what he was discussing was, one, the way that we're running the visa program for agricultural temporary visas and perhaps for non-agricultural visas like you're dealing with, James, it feels very similar to some of the other dumb conflicting things we do. So I don't know if the latest farm bill does this, but it wouldn't surprise me. When I got into political media not that long ago, the United States government was simultaneously doing two things. It was taxing cigarettes to discourage people from smoking and subsidizing tobacco farmers because we need to help tobacco farmers. And I would look at that and go, you could just quit doing both of these things and it would theoretically have the same effect. Like we're taxing one group and giving the money to the group that they're buying this. This is a dumb feedback loop of incompetence here, or potentially some graft. And I was kind of looking at him describing that situation where it seems to me the goal is to force people to not actually hire foreigners legally because they're setting the wages so high for the agricultural folks that they're just not gonna they're probably not gonna use them, or they're gonna go off the books or something. And it seems to me
it's you look at the rules and you say, what is the reason for that? What is the ultimate goal? Because it's not going to, if somebody's going to raise, it's like, I think they were talking about Uber drivers up in Oregon or something, that they now Uber Eats or something, and they just put a $5 tax on every order so the drivers would get more money. Well, logic is, and what's happened is nobody's ordering food through that service because it's just too expensive. And what's happening with agriculture is, these family farms who really need the workers can't get them because they can't jump through all the hoops. And the huge corporate farms, they're just buying huge tracts of land in Mexico and just bringing in produce from Mexico. And, when you can buy a bunch of grapes and it's cheaper to buy them from Chile than it is to buy them from, California, then something's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's sort of like, let's say theoretically the United States set a maximum speed for automobiles at 16 miles an hour, and then we were astonished at all of the speeding that was going on, and we'd look at somebody driving 95 miles an hour and go, see, that's what happens. What I would go is, well, why don't you just raise that say 60 miles an hour, and then that will allow you to focus on the people that are actually dangerous, that are driving at dangerous speeds. But the speed is so ridiculously low that you're just forcing everybody into an illegal situation that doesn't benefit anybody. If you loosen it and allow it to operate legally, then we have more bandwidth to focus on the people driving 100 miles an hour through a school zone.
Right. It's like the H-2B program. They only have 66,000 visas available,
and
then they split it up. And that's for the whole country for a year.
And then that's for your line of work.
And then they split it up, and 33,000 are good for employment starting October 1st, and 33,000 are good for employment starting April 1st. Well, all of a sudden, employment is for everybody is starting April 1st. Well, it's really not, because some people needed to start in March and some in February, but it's just they're forcing the employers to lie to say they start April 1st.
That sounds very dumb.
And that's the same thing what you're talking about. If they have stupid and every stupid rule they pass after that to fix that problem just causes multiple more problems. And if they just sit back and talk to normal, logical business owners, normal Americans, and say, what's wrong with the program, and then fix it, it could be fixed. But right now it's just people in Washington, D.C. and bureaucrats who just like being kings of their little empires where they can make rules, interpret rules, enforce rules. They're the judge, the jury. They just have their little empires they run.
Well, I'm thinking too, and I don't tend to focus on the malicious or the conspiratorial when I'm doing political analysis. But from the current status quo of forcing so much labor into an illegal situation, one group it benefits is people that don't mind hiring illegally. So the guy that we listened to, who seemed like a wonderful person, who was clearly concerned with the people that were working for him and was trying very, very hard to do everything legally, is at a real imposition because he's having more and more onerous regulations and increased labor costs that are going to make it difficult for him to compete. But if you are somebody that's not dealing with it legally, you're not giving them the prevailing wage that's established by the state. You're giving them whatever you feel like and no workman's comp and all of those other things. And you could really, really undercut them on labor. So it's kind of a Baptists and bootleggers situation where there's one group that wants it to be illegal because they don't like it at all. And there's another group that wants it to be illegal because it's great for them.
Yeah, you're correct. And that's what part of the problem in that a lot of the industries you'll hear about, like landscapers, they'll be talking about all the rules they have to jump through to do it legally. And then they can point to 15 other companies all around them, undercutting them on contracts and everything because they're not following any of the rules. They're not paying a prevailing wage. They're not providing any housing or workers' comp or taking taxes out or whatever. So, but it's just another part of, it's just part of lawlessness. And my problem is I've seen a lot of countries that are very corrupt and there are lawless, and you start one area, go to another area, go to another area, and when the population feels that everybody's corrupt and everybody's lying and everybody's stealing and the media won't tell you the truth, then they don't. If they find a $10 bill on the, falls out of somebody's pocket, they're never going to pick it up and give it back to the person that dropped it.
You get atrophying social trust and
right.
and decline in rule of law.
And I come from the school where if it don't belong to you, it's not yours. And I'm seeing more and more where if it don't belong to you and you want it, take it. And that's really what's, for me, destroying a lot of where we should be.
Well, so theoretically, if I were elected president, first I would make you secretary of circuses. I would create that as a secretary position. I think that'd be a basic. But
Can I be king of circuses?
You could be king of circuses. Absolutely. You could be. You will have the tallest top hat. You will have a golden scepter. But as a service for this feudal role we're going to create, if you were advising Congress in terms of ways to improve the immigration system, I mean, you're running an immigration agency. You've done scouting on behalf of people for multiple decades that are entering the United States. So you've got a bird's eye view of this. What would you want to alter about the current immigration system, particularly in your line of work with seasonal visas?
I would just make it employment and merit-based to start.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So one of the things that I was kind of tripped up on, the way you're describing, you're doing H-2B, is that right?
B.
H-2B, thank you. So you're doing non-agricultural temporary visas.
That's a majority. I'm also doing different types.
Okay, sure. But you've established that, one, you can only do this if no American has wanted the job, and two, the state establishes the prevailing wage. So there is a state-defined minimum wage that will legally stop it from undercutting any of the other wages. So I'm looking, they go, I don't see how that's going to hurt anybody. Like there might be some fringe cases, but it seems to me a very low likelihood that that's going to displace workers, given those two provisions you provided, and I'm sure there are others. So it seems to me that could be doubled, tripled, or just made unlimited, and it's not going to affect anybody.
Right. That's what we keep saying. It should just be an unlimited, should be uncapped. And when
if an American wants the job, they get the job. But if there are no Americans, then
right,
yeah.
If you talk to individual members of Congress on both parties that are the centrists, the moderates, they agree to that.
Uh-huh.
You get on the far right, and they just spout out they're coming in and undercutting U.S. workers and blah, 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 all the stuff that isn't true. And you can't change their minds because they just got an insight. They don't want to see statistics. They don't want to see anything.
Yeah.
And the very liberal Democrats say, well, because employer A filed the paperwork and paid for the paperwork and proved that they needed workers, and the workers came into the country and their visa says they have to work for employer A, they're slaves, which is not really the truth, because they can.
This is kind of the Bernie Sanders school of thought that if I'm not paying you as much as Bernie Sanders would, it is therefore exploitative and you're a wage slave.
Right.
Even though that person has decided
you're a slave because your visa's limited to that employer that went through all that. So you couldn't, if you came in an ABC landscaping company, did file all the paperwork, proved that they couldn't get workers, promised to pay the prevailing wage. Then you can only legally work for ABC landscaping
like the
company
sponsor, and
for the 9 months or 8 months that's on your visa. But it's not like you're there for life.
To clarify too, you could quit, could you not? Like
you can quit
if this guy's horrible and
you can go home. You can quit.
Yeah.
If there's another employer that's already gone through the process and is certified with the Department of Labor that they'll do all those things, then you can be transferred or ported to another company. What they are saying is, because you can't just walk off the job and walk down to your local grocery store and get a job there tomorrow, just like like anybody, then you're a slave. Well, it's not really a slave. You came here for a specific job that had a specific need, and the employer proved the need, and you accepted the job. So you're not a slave. You can leave. But that's what, like I'm saying, you've got the far left and the far right that fight it. The vast majority of members of Congress and the center agree that it should be an uncapped program, but they all agree it's immigration. It's not politically acceptable. We can't get it done. Blah, blah, blah. If the Republicans would say the Democrats will stop it, the Democrats say the Republicans will stop it. I've been fighting this for 30 years trying to get it fixed. And it's just it seems so simple to me. It's so logical and reasonable, because having a visa program that allows people to come in, earn money, send the money home, go home, support their families, it's not a burden on the United States. Seems like so logical. And we've shown with the H-2A program, for every single, statistically, they're saying right now there's not that many Mexican males trying to come into the country. And we show that for every H-2A visa that was issued to a Mexican male to come work in the agricultural industry, the number of undocumented that tried to come in went down by 1.04. So it was even a relationship of a little bit. So if I'm
understanding you correctly, this is the speed limit phenomenon.
Right.
If we go, hey, we're going to let you in, you got to pay taxes, you got to fill out this form, and you got to promise to leave in 9 months, and if you don't, you're illegal. When people go, okay, I wanted to work and deal for me, they come in and do that. There's one less person that would have entered illegally that would not have been a part of the system that's
Correct.
potentially in a tent camp or in the back of Impala or being trucked by a coyote or something.
Right. Or he brought his whole family with him, and he's got 3 kids now going to Garden Grove Elementary School.
Right.
And you've got the school teacher saying, I've got 42 kids in my class. I can't teach them all. And I don't speak all these languages. And then his wife has another baby and goes to the hospital, and there you've got all those costs. But if he had just come on a visa and gone to work, and the family was home with grandma, going to school, having the babies, building the house, that economy would, and it would also act as an economic magnet in that community. It would grow that community up, so other people that are even there would have the opportunity to earn extra money. The guy that makes the tortillas or bricks, if somebody's selling bricks,
which takes the pressure off people wanting to leave to come to the United States. So it actually lowers the phenomenon of people coming in.
So if you could do that, unlimited number of H-2B workers from El Salvador and from Honduras and Guatemala, and they each have to go to the consulate and get approved. So you wouldn't be getting people that they say, well, they're gang members, they're this, they're that, because they're pre-screened before they get issued a visa. I mean, the ones that come across the border are maybe post-screened.
Right.
They're here.
Yeah.
And in 7 years, we might find out why you came here when you go to your trial or your hearing. And 7 years from now, when you've got a new American wife and 3 new American kids, it's going to be awfully difficult. It'll be all that stuff with, we can't separate the family. We can't send him back to El Salvador and leave his wife and 3 kids here by themselves.
That's a really interesting take. If I were talking to the conservative, I am worried about immigrants, hordes, invasion, etc., all that rhetoric, you're doing an interesting way of looking at that, going, look, they're coming over anyway, but the difference is you're incentivizing them to bring their whole family and put down roots in a weird off-grid manner that's going to be very difficult legally and emotionally to remove from the situation at any point. Whereas what you're advocating, and I'm on board, is a system where you're incentivizing people to legally come over as individual workers for a limited period of time, send money home, and then leave. And so if you're worried about immigrants, your system works a lot better because the immigrants go home, as opposed to you do it illegally, they bring over their family, they put down roots, all those things, and stress the resources and all of those things. Then on the flip side, on the progressive side, you mentioned the slavery issue. Something that I butt heads with a lot of my progressive friends on is this weird, I'm always kind of stumped that this even comes up. It seems to me you do not create a good option by eliminating bad options. So let's accept for the moment that it's a bad option of someone works for one employer and they can't walk out and go look for another employer. It's not the ideal situation. All right, but eliminating that just means that they stay home, which was not the best option to begin with. If it were, they wouldn't have wanted to come to the United States. So there's 2 okay options and 1 really bad option, and we're going to eliminate the 2 okay options and only have the bad option. Nothing has been gained from this situation.
But the argument that they have no options is false. I mean, there's job boards. There's job boards specifically set up for H-2 workers to log on, post their credentials, and look for other jobs while they're here. And there's companies that will assist them to port from one company to another.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So if somebody comes in and says, I came in and this employer is not paying me correctly, and he's not doing this and he's not doing that, and I'd like to get a different job, there are options.
Okay.
And then once they transfer to the new company, they can just report the old employer to like wage and hour division and have the government people up their butt for a while, and the guy might learn to do things right, or he might be out of the program, or he might be in jail. But there are options, so it's a false argument. It's just like it's a false argument that the H-2B workers would undercut U.S. workers' wages. It's a false argument that they're slaves.
Yeah.
There are options.
Yeah. Well,
and I know of a lot of workers that have taken the options and moved to other companies, and they also, even if they put up with a bad employer for 8 months or 9 months, it doesn't mean they have to come back to the employer the next year.
They're not indentured servants.
Right.
They are free to leave at any time.
Right.
And they don't have to renew the contract.
Right.
And I did not know that either, that if they're having a really bad time, there are mechanisms. You still have to have some sort of sponsorship from a company, but there are mechanisms to find a new company to take over that sponsorship. So it's not even a situation where
and
you quit the job and you got to go home.
Right. And because there are plenty of companies looking for workers that are certified for workers, there are options.
Yeah. Well, and then I wish he were here now, but the peach grower that we listened to earlier today was talking about how I think it's in Oregon for agricultural workers, they've set, because states can add their own additional bit above federal law, that in Oregon, I think the prevailing wage for field hands in agriculture, if you're an American citizen, is $14.31 an hour, and they set it at $17 for temporary visas from people coming in from the South, and that even then, when they're pricing it so that you're getting paid, they're pricing it up. They still couldn't get. I think they had 43 people in Oregon, according to him, that actually wanted to go work that job, even though they're pushing the wage up. So it's not just a question of them being undercut by a glut of foreign workers that are willing to work dirt cheap.
Right, and what the problems are is like these government agencies always try to make it better for people. So these foreign workers that are coming in and working agriculture, there's no federal law for overtime rates like time and a half. So if they come in and work 40 hours at $20 an hour, they've got X number of dollars. If they work 50 hours at $20 an hour, they work that much more money. And if you're here to work and earn money and send it home, and you work 60 hours, what are you going to be doing in your other time? Just sitting back in your thing watching television? So if the guy wants to work 60 hours, but now Oregon, I think it's Oregon, has passed a rule that they have to get time and a half after 40. So what's a farmer going to do? They're going to cut everybody back to 40 hours.
What I would do is just hire more workers and then cap the amount that they were doing. I would say
that's exactly what they're going to do.
Instead of having 100 workers, I'm going to have 150 workers, and those guys are going to do the slack, and you're all going to get paid the same thing, so you don't go overtime. Why would I do anything different?
Right. So the guy that's been coming for 10 years earning $1,200 or $1,400 a week is now going to be back to $800 a week.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And he's going to wonder why. It's going to be the farmer's fault, of course.
Yeah.
Not the government's.
For your benefit, fella. You're making less money, but your dignity's been protected from the exploits of this evil capitalist.
So now in this work week where you're at a camp you're at a apple orchard, and there's really not a whole bunch of things to do at an apple orchard. You can sit here and drink a few more beers while you're not working.
Because you're not playing with your kids and going to their piano recital because they're back home. You're just hanging out with the other dudes.
You're just sitting there with the guys
in the trailer,
waiting to go to work,
in a bunk bed, watching Telenova or whatever. Okay. Well, we'll finish up here in a second. It sounds like the big thrust is that there's not a good economic fear of temporary workers coming in displacing jobs. Therefore, it really shouldn't be capped. It should be just industries need jobs Americans won't do. Let them do it. Are there any other things that you think would be low-hanging fruit that would improve the visa system?
No, just common sense and logic, but that's asking a lot from the government. On the audit process, just looking at what's logical and reasonable, and thinking the way a logical and reasonable person would think, and not like a bureaucrat. And if you've got a family business that's a mom and pop business and they got 10 employees, don't expect the kind of paperwork from IBM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you look at their payroll records, and if all she's got is a little notebook where mama has kept track of everybody's hours, don't turn it down because it's not a computer printout.
Yeah.
Just remember that these are just honest people trying to run a business and trying to stay in business.
Well, James, I've greatly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you. I think I honestly thought we were going to talk for 15 minutes. I apologize for going so far over, but I was absolutely fascinated by this. Would you be amenable to coming back on just to answer questions about circuses sometime?
Anytime.
Fantastic. Then I will get your contact info, and patrons, I think we will do a future bonus episode with James just answering your questions about the economics and life of circuses, because I would love to do a follow-up on that. And James, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
If you enjoy The Political Orphanage, please consider supporting it. Go to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. Y'all heard Jim. He's willing to come back and do a bonus episode just on circus stuff. So patrons, please leave comments as per usual on today's episode on Patreon. But also, if you have circus questions for Jim, put them in the comments as well. I will tabulate them, reach out to Jim, and we'll do a follow-up bonus episode just on circus stuff. For everybody else who doesn't want to ask a ringmaster questions about the circus, be it known there are 4 years of weekly bonus episodes just waiting for you to tap. You can get them by going to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. That's patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. Thanks. That's the show. Thank you, Jim Judkins, for coming on to discuss the circus and immigration. Thank you, Eric Stipe, who edited today's episode. And thank you, patrons who keep this audio circus moving from town to town selling mental cotton candy. Until next time, I've been Andrew Heaton, and so have you.